So every year in the late summer, the Connecticut Convention Center in downtown Hartford hosts the Retro World Expo, which is New England's largest annual event focusing on vintage video gaming and pop culture in general. Inside of the event space, you can expect to find a cornucopia of what this hobby has to offer, from a whole slew of vendors, numerous special guests, panels, tournaments, live wrestling, and well over 100 arcade machines, pinball tables, and game consoles, all free for guests to play. However, for the past few years of the expo, there has been one attraction at the event which I have been personally responsible for, and that is this, my CRT television wall. Essentially, this display is the accumulation of my decade of collecting and playing around with these things, and for the 3 days of the expo, I have a decent chunk of my CRT televisions presented here for the public to enjoy. Now, while at the event, I'm always willing to give guests in person a grand tour of what goes into creating a display like this. For today's episode of Steve's Assorted Stuff, I think I'm going to treat you all to a very special behind-the-scenes look at what exactly is inside of this entire display and how I constructed it. Now, first off, the wall itself is assembled from a few different wire shelving units that are stitched together, with a variety of smaller 9 to 13-inch tubes occupying the tighter center rack, and a stack of 6 larger 19 and 20-inch tubes that are flanking either side of that middle core. This entire display is pre-planned through means of this diagram that I drew, which acts as my blueprints to aid in the assembly process. After building the shelves around the televisions to ensure that each one is secure, the entire stack gets zip-tied together and ratchet straps down directly to the display stage in order to safely anchor everything in place. After I build this main display, I then connect everything that powers these screens behind the wall, but we'll get to that in just a bit. So while we are looking at the front-facing side, I want to first show you exactly what are the specific televisions housed within the CRT wall, and what is the kind of content that I'm displaying on each of them. So we're going to start on the very top left with my absolute favorite television of my entire collection, my 19-inch Panasonic wood grain knobby CRT. Now just to the right of it, we have two smaller 12 to 13-inch tubes and some excellent period-correct faux wood grain shells, with the Sony on the left showing an episode of Pokemon, and the Hitachi on the right with the childhood classic Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And then finishing off the top row, we have this lovely Zenith System 3 with the title screen for Super Mario World on the SNES. Dropping down below it, we have, of course, a Vectrex depicting its built-in game Mindstorm in all of its vectory goodness. And next to that is one of my Commodore monitors, with a custom greeting welcoming all of the attendees to the convention, styled to look exactly like the interface of the Commodore 64 home computer. Oh, and in the event that anyone watching this video is fluent in programming for the Commodore, I do have a bit of a confession to make. I cheated when making this. What you're seeing isn't coming from a real C64 and is really just a facsimile that I've animated on my own. While I do have a very slight understanding of coding in BASIC, my skills in that language are still quite pitiful and don't come anywhere near being able to actually make something like this, which could run on the real hardware. I'm sure this fake boot screen that I've created, which appears during each loop of the video, would be cakewalk to program for someone with much more knowledge of BASIC or 6502 assembly, but I think my work still looks accurate, and hopefully 99% of folks wouldn't even be able to tell that what you're seeing here is actually a forgery. And lastly in this row is my little 9-inch Sony playing some commercials that I ripped straight off of some Disney VHS tapes. And moving on to the next big television on the left is my Toshiba Blackstripe, playing a really cool demo video off of a Laserdisc, followed by a knobby Samsung showing the 2600 version of Centipede, and my beloved Panasonic microwave playing, of all things, an old training video for Wendy's restaurants. Now, one might ask, why did I select this particular video to play on this monitor here? Well, it all has to do with a somewhat unintentional Easter egg found within that training tape, as the same exact CRT shows up during one point of the video. Of course, why wouldn't I have an AG500 appear on the screen of my AG500 if the opportunity is out there? But anyways, moving on, we come to this 20-inch Trinitron, showing a promotional tape released by Nintendo during the hype leading up to the release of the N64. And then below this, on the next row, is a Mitsubishi 13-incher with Pac-Man. And then we have my one single PVM in my collection, which is playing those iconic intros to Eyewitness Video and Bill Nye the Science Guy that really any child of the 90s had the pleasure of viewing whenever a substitute teacher was called into their elementary school class. And then completing the big tubes on the left is my splendid Panasonic Tau, showing off some gloriously crisp Sonic the Hedgehog gameplay over component video. And then there's these 3 small 9-inch tubes along the very bottom of the display. This little quasar on the left has the startup animation for Super Mario 64, followed by some classic Pong gameplay on the black Magnavox in the center, and then another Magnavox flanking it on the right with some Air Zonk on the TurboGrafx 16. And lastly, well, we come to the surprising star of this year's show, my absolute monster of a computer monitor, my Samsung SyncMaster, with some good old Roller Coaster Tycoon gameplay being showcased on its screen. Honestly, it blew me away just how much attention this one tube got out of my entire display here, but there definitely was some good reason for it, because this thing is a beast on all accounts. For the majority of the show, I had it running at a resolution of 1024 by 768, which, well, honestly is rather low on the list of supported resolutions that this monitor is actually capable of. Believe it or not, this thing is able to display literally double that resolution and can max out at a whopping 2048 by 1536 pixels. However, even at half that scale, all of the details in the game's sprite work still looked just as sharp as any high-end PVM that I have ever seen. But the benefit to being set at that size was that I was also able to crank the refresh rate on this thing all the way up to 120 Hz, which, combined with the game itself averaging around 180 FPS on this specific rig, made for some real buttery smooth animation. And as for how I looked into owning this beast, well, I'm going to let the guy who gifted me this lovely SyncMaster fill you in on its origin story.
Insane how sharp
I know.
that is.
Like,
Yeah, I found that at the dump. Crazy.
and then everyone's like, dude, you got a SyncMaster?
Yeah.
It's like, dude, you know how great those things are? And they are great.
I found it at the dump.
So that covers all of the tubes housed within this wall. And in case any of you are curious as to what the specific model numbers are for any of these screens here, I'll go through them rapid fire style right now for you in the same order as before. So the 19-inch Panasonic is a CTH 1900 from 1986. The Sony way up top is a KV1207 from 1982. The Hitachi is a CT 1302 from 1980. The Zenith is a B1996W from 85. The Vectrex is, well, a Vectrex HP 3000 from 82, of course. The Commodore monitor is a 1702 from 1983. The little white Sony is a KV9PT50 from 1999. The Toshiba is a CX2035 from 1985. The Nabi Samsung is a TC3146M from 1991. My AG500 is an AG500 from 87. The 20-inch Trinitron is a KV20TS29 from 1993. That little Mitsubishi set is a CS1345R from 87. That vintage Sony monitor is a PVM1390 from 1989. My Tau is a CT20SL14J from 2004. That little Quasar is a TP917T from 1998. The black Magnavox is an RD0945-C102 from 94. The beige Magnavox is, well, it's actually missing its model number sticker, but I know it was built in 1989. And lastly is my Syncmaster, which is an 1100 MB from as recent as June of 2006. I'm pretty sure this is my youngest tube in my entire collection right here. But now that I've given you a tour of the tubes themselves, I'm sure many of you might be wondering exactly how I am feeding all of those different video signals to each of the screens independently. Well, fortunately for you, I am able to pull back the proverbial curtain and give you a peek behind the scenes on how I drive all of this video gear. So everything that's showing direct game footage is coming straight from the real consoles. The gameplay you are seeing on the screens up front is essentially the attract mode that is built into each of those specific games, and I just let those consoles run on a continuous loop. Even Roller Coaster Tycoon on the Syncmaster is the actual game playing in real time on a PC that I have hidden back there. I just simply load up one of the parks that I've built over the years and just let the scenario play non-stop. However, for the rest of the video content, this is where the stacks of DVD players come in. Pretty much all of the footage is ripped directly off of various VHS tapes of interest that I have in my collection, which I then burn to these DVDs. In order to simplify their use, I've encoded each of the discs with instructions to automatically start playing the video immediately instead of booting up to a menu, and once the video reaches the end, the players simply restart the video from the very beginning in an endless loop. Having this setting enabled allows me to just simply plop a disc into any DVD player and close the tray, after which the machine will just start playing the video on the disc and keep playing it over and over without me having to do anything else until it's time to shut everything down at the end of the day. Now, are there better ways to stream digital video content to old CRTs like this? Absolutely, but here's the thing. I am a lazy cheapskate, and this solution meets both of those goals splendidly. Part of me takes a bit of pride in doing something as simply as possible, and this method of buying up a bunch of $5 DVD players from thrift stores seems to work just well for my needs. This method has been 100% reliable for me for years, so why try to fix what ain't broken? There is, however, one video source in this stack that does come from something a bit more elegant, and that would be the Toshiba Blackstripe playing the Laserdisc demo video. Yes, whenever you see the splash screen saying you are watching a Laserdisc, you are in fact watching a video from a real Laserdisc player hidden within my display. But apart from the equipment itself, every time I do this display, it always ends up looking like a total rat's nest of wiring back here. I always go into one of these shows thinking that I'm actually going to put in some effort into my cable management, but in the end, I always wind up just slapping everything together just to the point where everything is working as fast as I possibly can. The public isn't supposed to see this side of the display anyway, so hey, as long as it works. Oh, and in case you're wondering just how much juice I am sucking down with my entire display here running at the same time, I did put a kilowatt meter in line with the power cable supplied to me by the convention staff. This entire thing surprisingly draws only around 1100 watts, although the amperage is somewhat up there at just under 12 amps. My extension cords and power strips are rated up to 15 amps though, so I'm still within a decently safe range with this setup here. Now, while this display here is more or less identical to the television wall that I assembled at last year's Retro World Expo back in 2024, I did bring one additional item to this year's show, and that would be my beloved RCA console television that I had set up out in the lobby. The event planners and I wanted to do something extra to provide guests with a nice little relaxing space located outside of the main convention floor, so I assembled this pseudo-Grandma's house display using my RCA for attendees to rest up at. Throughout the weekend, I had a variety of different movies on VHS playing on this television for everyone to enjoy, and it certainly was a delight for me seeing everyone's reaction to it as they passed it by. And everyone's reaction to the CRT wall itself was stellar all weekend as well. It's amazing for me being able to see everyone's joy when they come across the display, and my work here absolutely has turned it into one of the best photo op spaces in the entire event. But what was even more exciting for my personal experiences at this year's Retro World Expo was getting to meet some of you for the very first time. It's totally surreal for me having some fans of my work come up to me and ask, "Hey, are you Steve?" Hearing that simply blows my mind. Thank you to every single one of you who showed up to say hi to me. And I do apologize if I missed any of you at this year's show. I'm always running around like a total maniac all 3 days at the event, so without a doubt, there's always something that I end up missing at each expo. Case in point, most of my footage in my video here, I was only able to capture during the early bird hour on Sunday morning before the main doors opened to the public. That's usually my only opportunity to film before those floodgates open up. However, I'll definitely try to make acquaintances with more of you during any of the upcoming shows. Oh, and I did end up going home one tube richer after this year's show. Meet my new-to-me Sony KV 1936 RH from 1981. So I figure if I'm going for the Infinity Gauntlet of mid-size RF-only tubes and wood-grain cabinets, I obviously would need a fine Trinitron specimen as part of that collection. So when Steve of RetroTech announced that he would be bringing this lovely tube that he recently recapped to the show, I knew that television would absolutely be coming home with me by the end of that weekend. I'll certainly be sure to feature more about this wonderful tube in an upcoming video for you all sometime in the future. And speaking of which, it's time for a few shoutouts now. I do want to give a big thank you to the aforementioned Steve from RetroTech, as well as Bob from Retro RGB for all of your camaraderie throughout the weekend. I always look forward to hanging around and talking tubes with you guys every single year. Thank you. Steve was also courteous to invite me to join him on stage during his panel on CRTs, which took place on Saturday afternoon, which you can watch in its entirety on his channel. A link to that video is in the description. I also want to give a massive shout out to the folks responsible for Retro World Expo happening in the first place. Ricky, Lance, Aaron, and especially Chris, who have always welcomed me to put on my little show of CRTs at their convention over the years. And then as for this specific year, I did have a little bit of help with the loading and unloading process, so I would also like to thank my friends Miguel, Alex, Justin, and Val for helping me heave my crap around the convention center during the event. And, of course, a truly massive thank you goes out to my father, who let me borrow his Suburban to transport all of my stuff between my home and the convention center. What would have been upwards of 5 trips with my Subaru, I was able to accomplish in only 2 trips with this huge thing. I greatly, greatly appreciate being able to streamline my entire work that weekend, thanks to having this vehicle at my disposal. Thank you, Pop. But most of all, I want to thank all of you for all of your wonderful feedback and participation on my channel here on YouTube. This month marks the 1-year anniversary since I started my regular uploads here, and the response from the community has been so positive for me. Just this week, I had one of my videos reach 100,000 views for the very first time, which completely astounds me. I never imagined I would ever have an audience of my own, and it thrills me seeing some of you regularly coming back to see what I've been up to in each video of mine. And to those of you who learned about my channel from attending the expo and are just joining me here now for the first time, welcome! I'm hopeful that my menagerie of assorted stuff that I feature here on my channel proves to be just as interesting to you as it is to me. I guess you can say at this point we are starting Season 2 of Steve's Assorted Stuff, and I've got both some big videos and some big expansions to my production methods planned for the future, so definitely stick around to see what else I have in store for you coming up on the horizon. Thank you again to every single one of you for your continued support and viewership, and as always, until we meet up again in the next installment of Steve's Assorted Stuff, have a great day, everybody.